Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of the Very Cold Lasagna podcast, your filthy casual place for all those filthy casual takes on the world of sports. I am your host, DylanLasagna. This is episode number 152 of this icy yet spicy podcast. Today, we got a good show for you all because we are nearing the halfway point of our 2023 NFL season preview month as we wrap up the last NFC division here on this episode. And that last NFC division, of course, being the NFC East. We've already covered 3 divisions so far, and that is the NFC West, the NFC North, the NFC South, and now, like I said, we are down to the last NFC division here on Very Cold Lasagna's NFL season preview month, and that is the Eastern Division, the NFC East. So yeah, we're nearing that halfway point, and then when we get to the next batch, we're going to the AFC side of things. So I hope you've been enjoying NFL season preview month so far, even if you're not an NFL fan or a sports fan in general. I just hope you've been enjoying the content that we've been providing here on Very Cold Lasagna. And I've certainly been enjoying it, and I hope you are too. So anyway, before we get into things here on this episode of Very Cold Lasagna, a little bit of housekeeping of sorts. If you're listening to this on audio, make sure you rate and review the show. Whether it's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts or listen to the show. Yeah, rate the show 1 to 5 stars and leave a review. It helps me improve the show in any way or shape or form. And then if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you leave a like, comment, share, smash the subscribe button. Do whatever you can to support and spread the word on all my filthy casual fan takes on Very Cold Lasagna. And then, of course, follow the show on social media on Twitter and Instagram at Very Cold Lasagna for extra stuff that I like to spread on social media. Yeah, at Very Cold Lasagna. So before we get into the swing of things here in this episode, I just want to do a brief explanation for those of you that haven't seen any of the NFL season preview episodes or even the team-by-team clips that I've been posting out on exclusively on the YouTube channel. So mainly what I do with these NFL season preview episodes is that I basically cover every single team going into the 2023 season. I give a little bit of a summary of what happened the season prior, and then I look at some of their big offseason moves that either made a team better or worse on paper. And then basically what I took away from their offseason. And then I look at their schedule and see what are the most important games on that schedule, and maybe how's it going to impact them and what their goal is for 2023? And some of the biggest questions and concerns I have for either team going into 2023 or just the season in general. And yeah, that's pretty much the NFL season preview month in a nutshell for those of you that are just catching up or just beginning your journey here. Now, keep in mind, this doesn't take into account what has mostly happened in like other off-season activities like OTAs or mini camps, or even right now with training camp, or like maybe even get closer preseason stuff. I will like update like little tidbits of that, but probably not too much of that because again, keep in mind, I'm doing this from the eyes of a casual fan, so just bear with me on that stuff. So that being said, now that we're all caught up here, let's now take a look at the final NFC division that we're going to be talking about here today. We've already done 3 of the 4, the NFC West, the NFC North, and the NFC South. So now we have one last NFC division left to talk about, and that is the NFC East. So going into 2022, when I talked about them last year, I didn't have a lot of high hopes for the NFC East as a whole, aside from one team. That's because, you know, the rest of the NFC East didn't do a lot in terms of trying to improve itself. And actually one team actually downgraded like a good ton. But there's that one team that massively did a lot of upgrading. And man, boy, was I wrong about this division. The entire division proved me wrong. Every single team fought from the get-go. And sure, it looked like there was no hope for one particular team or another. But at one point, it looked like the entire division was going to make the playoffs at one point in the season. And sure, that didn't happen, but 3 out of the 4 teams in this NFC East Division made the playoffs. And that was surprising in itself. Like, nobody expected 3 teams in that division were going to make it. We're going to obtain 3 of the 7 playoff spots. So, damn. So, 3 of the 4 was a surprising outcome. And one of them made it as far as the Super Bowl. Yeah, they didn't win it, but and they fought till the very end. But almost is never enough, as I say. So when you look at their seasons going into 2023, I expect things to be a lot more competitive this time around, even with so much turnover from all 4 teams. And, you know, even if there's going to be either total dominance or maybe even Super Bowl hangover by the NFC champion that resides in this division, I'm going to talk about how these other teams can at least, you know, give them a challenge this coming fall. And I feel like these challenges could make things for the NFC champion in this division kind of difficult for them. Not overly difficult, but maybe a little bit of a big and kind of difficult-ish challenge for them. So for our first team in part 4 of our NFL season preview 2023, we're going to take a trip down to the nation's capital and take a look at the Washington Commanders. The newly named Washington Commanders in 2022. Yeah, there was a lot of controversy down in the nation's capital. But aside from all that, on the field, they started their season experimenting with the new quarterback in town, Carson Wentz, who was traded during that offseason. And yeah, it was not exactly a good experiment to go with. But an injury reopened the door for the mainstay in that organization, Taylor Heinicke, to take over. And kind of like what he did the season prior, he won them a good chunk of games that put themselves in good playoff position. But unfortunately, once December rolled around, some bad luck came about, and Ron Rivera, the head coach, kind of got desperate after he saw Taylor Heinicke got a bad performance, and he reverted back to Carson Wentz as a starter when they had a fourth round rookie in Sam Howell, the rookie quarterback, in there. And in a must-win game, he turned to Carson Wentz, and that went just as well as you expected. And then the Commanders got themselves eliminated from playoff contention. But, you know, they did end their season on a high note. They surprisingly blew out the Dallas Cowboys in their season finale when the Cowboys had a slight chance, a very slim chance, to win the division, the NFC East, in the finale, but they blew their load. They blew it, and the Commanders spoiled their party with rookie quarterback Sam Howell when he should have played the game prior. But nonetheless, they ended their season 8-1. Yes, they tied with the New York Giants in that critical game. But nonetheless, you're now entering a season where there's no more Carson Wentz. There's no more Taylor Heinicke. You're now with your second year quarterback, Sam Howell. And that's obviously your goal for 2023. You got to figure out what exactly you have in Sam Howell, because keep in mind, in that game against Dallas, he did okay, but he didn't throw the ball too much. It was a lot of relegated to the run game, and then there was a lot of Dallas shooting itself in the foot, pretty much. So that game was pretty much over and done with. So Sam Howell didn't have to do a lot of the work. So your goal for 2023 is to determine whether or not Sam Howell can be a starting quarterback for your team. So my team needs for the Washington Commanders, when I talked about them back in February, or what's it, February? No, March, sorry. They had to address the quarterback position if they were not going to commit to Sam Howell. That was easier said than done because, well, they finished 8-1. They were middle of the pack, and there's no guarantee that they could trade up to get a quarterback. There's also no guarantee that there's going to be like a big name quarterback on the market. They also had to invest in some big quarterback spots because, well, their secondary was not exactly that great. So both of their corner spots needed to be addressed in the offseason. And then they had to find 2 guards in the offensive line because the interior offensive line, yeah, it didn't hold up. I mean, it didn't hold up bad. it was just like so subpar that Carson Wentz faced a lot of heavy pressure in the interior, and so did Taylor Heineke at times. So looking at some of their offseason moves, obviously, like I said, they released Carson Wentz, and then they lost Taylor Heineke to the Atlanta Falcons, so he goes down south. And then they also released J.D. McKissick, but then again, they didn't really need him anymore because, you know, you have Antonio Gibson, you have Brian Robinson, who broke out last year. They also released corner Bobby McCain, which was a little bit of a surprise because, well, yeah, that's the reason why they need both corner spots to be invested in now. And then they let linebacker Cole Holcomb to go to the Pittsburgh Steelers. I mean, he's a little bit on the older side, so that was fine. As long as they addressed his spot, they re-signed nose tackle Daron Payne, a key part in that pass rush, and center Tyler Larson. So a solid piece in the offensive line. Some of the pieces that they did add in both free agency and the draft, they addressed the backup quarterback spot in Jacoby Brissett from the skid marks, the Cleveland Browns. No, I'm kidding. Jacoby Brissett in 2022 actually held up decently until Deshaun Watson came back. So can't really complain there. So he's a decent, reliable quarterback, I guess. And then they got offensive lineman Andrew Wiley from the Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, he was okay with them. Linebacker Cody Barton from the Seattle Seahawks. Guard Nick Gates from the New York Giants. So 2 pieces in the offensive line already there. So let's see how they do. And then perhaps a big piece, not on the playing side, but more on the play calling side. They got offensive coordinator Eric Bieniemy from the Kansas City Chiefs. I know a lot of people were raving for him to get a head coaching job, but perhaps maybe this is the stepping stone that he needs. Maybe trying to mentor, maybe trying to coach up Sam Howell. Maybe this is a start right here. And then the draft, they did their work. Getting corner Emmanuel Forbes from Mississippi State, and safety and corner hybrid like a swingman player, Quan Martin from Illinois. So it was mainly the defense that they addressed in the draft. So for the Washington Commanders, they certainly commanded some decent offseason moves to balance out the team. And, you know, I initially questioned the release of Bobby McCain when, you know, one of their offseason goals for them was to go and get 2 cornerbacks. But, you know, they went on to address such in the draft. And, you know, they both look okay, just as long as they adapt to the scheme that that's necessary in their defense. On the offensive side, they got a little bit better with Andrew Wiley on the offensive line. And they also got a guard in Nick Gates from the Giants. And they also drafted a swing offensive lineman by the name of Braden Daniels from Utah. So let's see how it pans out for them. So I think the offensive line looks a tad bit better. Let's just hope it holds up for Washington, especially with Sam Howell under center. But, you know, despite all that, though, I still think Ron Rivera's seat is still pretty hot. That's because, you know, for the past couple of years since he got there, sure, they won the division in 2020, but that division was awful in the pandemic. I mean, it took a losing record to win that division. And sure, they put up a fight against Tampa, but it was just like, yeah, that's not going to slide the next year. And it certainly didn't. It certainly did not command anything. So he's had middling quarterback play. And he's also made questionable decisions at that spot last year too. So, oofa. Along with a couple other in-game bad decisions that kind of make you wonder if Ron Rivera should be their head coach. I mean, sure, he really tried his best, you know, showing leadership, and I give him that. But it's just like on the field, it's like you really got to wonder if this is going to hold up. So this is kind of a make or break year for Ron Rivera, because if he can't make anything good with Howell, with this coaching staff, there's going to be questions to be had, especially considering what I'm going to talk about next in just a bit. So looking at some of their key potential games in 2023, you have your first game at home against Arizona. You host them. You get to see your first look at if Sam Howell is starting, then fans are going to see how he's going to do. If he does good, okay, there's a sign. If he does bad, then, might have to consider putting in Jacoby Brissett. Then the big test comes when Josh Allen comes to town and the Bills too. So a big challenge already right there. And then another big challenge comes when you have to go to Philadelphia to face the NFC champion Eagles. Yeah, whether or not they do well or they struggle, the Eagles are always going to be a challenge against anybody when you're the opponent. So that all being said, some of my big questions for the Washington Commanders is obviously going to relate to Sam Howell. You know, everyone's been talking about, how Sam Howell's been doing well in having a full offseason, you know, doing well in OTAs, doing well in mini camps. But, you know, how is that going to translate into game action? Especially considering when you have an offense with Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson, you know, two pretty good receivers that did well with Taylor Heineke last year. And you have this 1-2 punch. Brian Robinson Jr. and Antonio Gibson at running back. But still, you have questions about how well Sam Howell can perform. And he only had one game of starting experience. And he didn't do all that much in that win against the Cowboys. So you have questions abound. And then here's the thing I wanted to go back point to earlier. The Commanders are barring any sudden changes. Are there going to be any other changes occurring with the impending ownership change? So in case you missed it, Dan Snyder finally sold the team to an investment group led by Josh Harris. So it's going to be finalized. I don't know when, but there could be some big changes coming around, and depending on what else happens, there could possibly be even more changes. I don't know. So it's going to be curious if this new ownership group looks at this season as an evaluation one, depending on how well or bad Sam Howell plays, or maybe even other players too. Because if so, and yeah, like I said, Ron Rivera's seat is definitely very, very hot. So, like I said, the Commanders made some decent moves in the offseason to help out their defense and their offensive line. But everything is going to revolve around Sam Howell. How is he going to do with only one game of starting experience? He's like a day 3 pick. It's going to be really interesting. Now, there's some talent here, but I don't think it's going to be enough to command Washington to anything. No, I wouldn't say significantly positive, but I would say, I don't know if I would say remotely positive either, but I'll give it in the middle. I'll keep them in the middle because this division is going to be very competitive. I expect Washington to be competitive as well, but I just don't think it's going to be enough. They're not going to command enough in 2023. It's simple as that. So I expect them to go 7-10 at best 8-9, because who knows what Sam Howell's going to be like. Is he going to be howling like a wolf? Oh, like he did against the Cowboys, or is he just going to lie down and pray? So the next team that we're going to be talking about is one of my surprise teams from 2022, and that is the Big Men in Blue, and that is the New York Giants. The Giants in 2022, as I talked about them last year, they were expected to finally begin their rebuild under their new head coach and former offensive coordinator for the Buffalo Bills, Brian Daboll. But boy, was I wrong about that. They greatly overachieved in that season by winning more games that they should have to claim a playoff spot. Daniel Jones surprisingly did pretty good for himself. So did Saquon Barkley and others. But in fairness against them, their competition consisted of other significantly flawed teams like the Chicago Bears, who else? The Houston Texans, and the Indianapolis Colts. A bunch of very bad teams that they played against. And that included their playoff team that they faced, the Minnesota Vikings, one of the most fraudulent teams that you'll see out there in 2022. And so they beat the Minnesota Vikings, and then they had their own major problems exposed against a much better team in their division rival, the Philadelphia Eagles, in that smashing in the divisional round. So nonetheless, the Giants surprisingly had a successful season, 9-7-1. We're the 6th seed in the playoffs. And then they actually upset, or I don't know if you can consider it upset because it was the Vikings for all teams. Yeah, they upset the Minnesota Vikings before they got smashed by the Eagles. But nonetheless, they made it as far as the divisional playoffs. So now your goal for 2023 is to get even further than that. If you're in New York, you got to make the playoffs once more and maybe go even further than that. To do that, you had to answer some questions going into the offseason. As I talked about in February, you had a big decision to make regarding your quarterback, Daniel Jones. We're going to re-sign him, or we're going to try to make a big swing at another quarterback. And then you also have to make a decision on your running back, Saquon Barkley. Those two guys, for as good as a year they had in 2022, everything else prior to that was, I don't know. It was 50-50. So looking at some of the events that happened in the offseason, guess what ended up happening? They re-signed Daniel Jones. Not only did they re-sign Daniel Jones, they re-signed him to a big fat contract. I think it was 3 to 4 years with a good amount of money. Damn. The Giants really did commit to Daniel Jones, huh? Danny Penny's in the years prior, and then all of a sudden he has one good year. Okay. They better hope this pays off. They really better hope this investment pays off for them. Because if it doesn't, this is really going to bite them in the ass. And then they franchise tagged running back Saquon Barkley. But Barkley hasn't signed the franchise tender yet as I'm recording this. But as I'm also recording this, at the time I'm making this, they're still working on a long-term deal. So by now, it could either be Barkley signs a long-term deal, or they don't get it done at the deadline, and either he signs that franchise tag or he doesn't. So it's going to be an interesting scenario. So who knows how it'll play out. Either way, Barkley is in an interesting situation. And then they also made another big move. They traded for Raiders from the Las Vegas Raiders, the tight end Darren Waller, in return for a third-round pick. I think it was a solid move for them, even though Darren Waller has had some injury problems in the last season. But when Darren Waller is on the field, he is pretty productive. He was productive for Derek Carr in the time they were together, and I think Daniel Jones, if he can throw the Waller consistently, Darren Waller could be a very good tight end option for them as well. So looking at some of my offseason priorities for them during that offseason, they had to improve the defense because that secondary was bad. It was pretty bad because when they shut down Dexter Lawrence, when they shut down Kayvon Thibodeau at the defensive line, when there's no pass rush, the secondary was exposed. They literally had no help in the secondary. They were getting torched in that defense. And they also had to find some help at the offensive line because it was a little bit better than past years, but they certainly could use an upgrade over there. Looking at some of their offseason moves, like what they got, they didn't lose a lot. They honestly didn't lose a lot, so that was at least good for the Giants. So they only lost Julian Love to the Seattle Seahawks, probably one of their major positive players on defense. And they lost center John Feliciano to the 49ers. I mean, no, I guess not really too much of a biggie considering what they added anyway. So they also re-signed receiver Darius Slayton, a key piece to their offense. And looking at some of that free agency and draft additions, they signed Paris Campbell, the receiver from the Indianapolis Colts. Okay, some added depth positions. Receiver Jamison Crowder from the Buffalo Bills, so another receiver to go alongside Darius Slayton. Linebacker Bobby Okereke from the Indianapolis Colts as well. And safety Bobby McCain from the Commanders. So that was a solid move from the Giants to snatch away Bobby McCain once he got released from Washington. And then the draft is where they did their dirty work. They got corner Deontay Banks from Maryland. Pretty good move there. And then I like this move too. John Michael Schmitz from Minnesota. So he looks like a big upgrade in replacing John Feliciano. And then I was initially down on this move, on this draft pick, because in my filthy casual scouting report, there were some questions I had about this guy, Jalen Hyatt from Tennessee. So I think it's a good pick from the Giants, but hopefully he pans out because, again, I had questions about Hyatt when I did my scouting report on him, when I did that filthy casual scouting report. They also got a running back, Eric Gray from Oklahoma. So I thought that was a smart move considering in case what happens to Saquon. But we'll see what happens. And then corner Trey Hawkins from Old Dominion. So looking at all these moves by the Giants, I thought they improved themselves nicely. Not great, not like terribly, but it was a nice improvement. Like in the middle. They had themselves a solid draft by addressing their needs. They needed a corner since they didn't replace James Bradbury yet. And they did such, getting Banks and Hawkins. Meanwhile, on the offensive side, you put some flyers out on center and John Michael Smits, and he looks like a big upgrade. Like I said, in replacing John Feliciano, he has some pretty good blocking skills that can really help the middle of that offensive line for New York, especially when it comes to protecting Daniel Jones. Because in that game against the Eagles in the divisional, it was pretty bad luck for that Giants offensive line. And as I going back to Jalen Hyatt, I was a little suspect in that evaluation, but there's still plenty of time for him to develop into a secondary or maybe even a top role in that Giants receiving core. So I imagine he won't be starting right away, but yeah, if he develops along, then that would be a big boost for Big Blue's offense. So looking at some of their key games for 2023, you got a really big one to start off with. The very first week against the Dallas Cowboys. And of course, the NFL schedules it in prime time on Sunday night. The bright lights in New York are shining yet again for Danny Dimes and the Giants. So it's going to be a big game, a big test for Daniel Jones and the Giants. Can they thrive in the bright lights against Dak Prescott and the boys? And then you got to travel to San Francisco 2 weeks later to play the 49ers on Amazon Prime Video, John, on Thursday against that strong 49ers defense and whoever's going to be their quarterback. And then you have to travel to Western New York to Buffalo to take on the Bills a couple weeks later in week 6. Josh Allen's no joke either. And then several weeks later, and perhaps what could be a big divisional game, week 16 at the Philadelphia Eagles on Christmas Day. It'll depend on where both teams stand, but hell, it could either be an interesting game or just another Christmas Day game. So when I look at the Giants and what they did during this offseason, entering this upcoming regular season, I have to wonder if re-signing Daniel Jones is going to be worth it. Because, like I said, for as good as the 2022 season that Daniel Jones has had, everything else before that was not great. It was not great. But who knows? Maybe his success will carry over into 2023, considering how much Brian Dabble has really challenged Daniel Jones to step up his game, get more aggressive. He made him use his legs more, which was key to the Giants winning these games late in the season to get that playoff spot. But unfortunately, that was limited in that last playoff game. But yeah, one good season doesn't exactly equate, a big fat contract, to be honest with you. But, it's something for the Giants to really consider if it's really going to be worth it. But who knows? We'll see. So the New York Giants, made some good work in the offseason with free agency and the draft to fill some needs. But again, it's going to depend on how Daniel Jones does. Is he going to show that he'll continue to improve? If he does, perhaps the Giants can make a bit of a run in the playoff spot again. But if he doesn't, then expect more of the same from Danny Pennies in 2023. Now, I don't expect the Giants to go like total free fall or like take a big regression or anything like that. I expect the Giants, to stay a little bit in the median, like where they were in 2022, maybe 9-8, because they added enough good pieces, free agency in the draft that they can stay competitive in not just the division, but in this weaker NFC. So they do have themselves a shot to compete at a postseason berth. So not all is lost. It just depends. Again, are they going to get Saquon for week one? And are they going to get a good productive season from not just him, but from Daniel Jones? And are they going to get their investments paid off from their defensive signings, their offensive line? Again, everything's going to revolve around all that. But the most important thing that's going to revolve around is Daniel Jones. So for our next team that we're going to be talking about here in part 4 of our 2023 NFL season previews, we go from the big blue side of New York down to the big D in Texas as we talk about the Dallas Cowboys. How about them Cowboys? Yeehaw, Maggle! So for the Dallas Cowboys, I had some expectations for them in 2022. And why is that? Well, they headed into last season, with a lot of changes to the team. And, I thought the season prior in 2021, they had a really good chance to finally grab that brass ring that every delusional Cowboys fan was trying to obtain. Super Bowl, NFC Championship, pal. And I thought it was their best shot. They looked really good in 2021. But once again, they found a way to let you down. So they went into 2022 with a lot of changes on the team due to the salary cap. They lost a lot of good players on that team. But despite all that, in an early season injury to Dak Prescott, they actually managed to do just fine. And when Dak came back at the end of October, they still stay hot. And they kept pace with the Philadelphia Eagles in the division race. And for the second straight season, they clinched a playoff berth. And because they beat the Philadelphia Eagles, Jalen Hurts was hurt. They were playing Gardner Minshew. They lost to the New Orleans Saints after they played each other in late in the season. There was a very small chance Dallas could have won the division. And not only they won, but a couple other things went their way. But of course, we're talking about the Dallas Cowboys here. They, once again, found a way to let everyone down. They found a way to fumble that up too, because they got their butts whooped by a wolf. A wolf by the name of Sam Howell. And the Commanders in the season finale in the nation's capital. Like, how the hell do you do that, man? Like, did you fall asleep so bad in the night prior that you forgot there was a game? Like, how do you even do that? Like, what the hell? So anyway, they forgot what they forgot what happened in that game. They destroyed the Tampa Bay Bucks because, well, they were bad all season. And Tom Brady was already thinking retirement, unfortunately. Because, well, I guess the next game after, the Cowboys did exactly what they always done in the playoffs, and that was choke. That same Dallas team that whooped on the Bucks was nowhere near to be found against the 49ers. Yes, the same 49ers that they faced the playoffs prior in the divisional round. They were nowhere to be seen in a game where the two teams were basically fighting each other in a stalwart battle. The Dallas Cowboys were nowhere to be seen, especially on offense, including that last awful desperation play. Like, I can't even explain what that was. But anyway, yeah, the Cowboys, once again, were that close to reaching the NFC Championship game and went down the shit again. So I know I'm being harsh on Dallas, but it's like all of you are setting way too high expectations for them, especially from their fan base. So they at least match their season record at 12-5 last year. They at least make it a little bit further to the divisional playoffs. That's one step. But now, if you're the Cowboys, you got to make that next step. You got to finally reach the NFC Championship game. That's your goal for 2023. You have to get to the NFC Championship game for the first time since, what was it? The 1990s? That was the last time you were there. And then when you get there, maybe you give yourself a chance to get to the Super Bowl. I'm trying to help you out, man. I'm trying to help you out. But unfortunately for the Cowboys, they didn't help themselves out in the offseason. Looking at some of their team needs that I had for Dallas in the offseason, they had to retool both their trenches, the offensive line and defensive line, because they were expected to lose a couple of players in free agency. So not good for them. And they had to find a new starting tight end because Dalton Schultz was set to be a free agent too. And unfortunately for the Cowboys, they didn't have a lot of cap space. They didn't have a lot of money to spend for their players that are set to become free agents on those, specifically those sides of the ball. So looking at some of their offseason moves, they saved a little bit of money by releasing running back. Yes, the running back that started it all for that era, that Dak Prescott, Zeke Elliott area, Ezekiel Elliott. They released him. But then again, for Ezekiel Elliott, his play was starting to dwindle like after 2016. So it's like, ugh. And then the tight end that I was talking about, Dalton Schultz, he actually went to the other Texas team, the Houston Texans. So, it was a little surprising that the Dallas Cowboys couldn't keep him on that cheap deal that Schultz ended up getting with the Texans. So, oh wow, a little surprising there. And they let Connor McGovern go to the Buffalo Bills. So now he's going to be protecting Josh Allen. And now that offensive line for Dallas is a bit weaker. They did re-sign a couple of their other key players though, like Lane Vander Esch at linebacker and the backup quarterback that was kind of essential in that early season stretch, Cooper Rush. So for them, he's been pretty reliable for them. Safety Donovan Wilson, edge rusher Dante Fowler, so pass rushing depth, and running back Tony Pollard via the franchise tag. I'm not too sure if he's already signed the franchise tag, but I assume he did. And then looking at some of their free agency additions, they made actually two early big moves in free agency. And that was via trade. They got a receiver by the name of Brandon Cooks from the Houston Texans. So he's going to the other side of Texas now. They gave away a 5th round pick and next year's 6th round pick. But the important thing for Dallas is that they have another receiver for Prescott to throw through. And more importantly, a good receiver. They also got corner Stephon Gilmore from the Indianapolis Colts in return for a 5th round pick. So much needed help in the secondary alongside Trayvon Diggs. They also got swing offensive lineman Chuma Agdoga from the Atlanta Falcons and running back Ronald Jones from the Kansas City Chiefs. So a backup for Tony Pollard, but in the draft, the Cowboys were okay, a little so-so. Defensive tackle Mazi Smith from Michigan. So a little bit of interior help on the defensive line. Tight end Luke Shoemaker from Michigan. So he's going to be the replacement for Dalton Schultz. Linebacker DeMarvion Overshawn from Texas. And edge rusher Vilami Vehoko from San Jose State. So these sound like solid additions to their defensive line. So when you look at this Cowboys offseason heading into their 2023 season, two things I took away from it. They solved the receiver problem, but not the offensive line problem. At least with the receiver problem, Brandon Cooks, I think he can fit seamlessly as another target for Dak Prescott to throw to. Because now, the thing with 2022, Michael Gallup took a little bit of a while to come back from the ACL injury that he suffered in the season prior. And it kind of took a hit on the Cowboys offense a bit. And they still didn't really have like a 2 or 3 receiver since they traded away Amari Cooper for some stupid reason. So now it gives the Cowboys a much better, at least a little bit of a better flow on offense now that you have 3 three receivers like to go to, like three more flexible options. Now you have CD, Gallup, and now Brandon Cooks. However, the offensive line that's been like so good for Dallas these last several years, it took a hit. They let Connor McGovern go to the Bills, and now like with tackle Tyron Smith having these injury problems, it's like, is this offensive line for Dallas starting to like crumble a bit? It's starting to look like it to me, because now if this offensive line isn't strong like it was, Prescott's going to struggle. Like that goes for any like NFL quarterback. If you don't have a really strong offensive line, you're going to struggle. And if this Dallas offensive line isn't strong as it once was in the 2023 season, Dak is going to struggle like hard. There are like notable examples of Dak faltering without a good offensive line. On the defensive side, I think Trayvon Diggs is going to benefit good with Stephon Gilmore on the opposite end. Now, Gilmore's a little bit older, but I do think he's still a strong, productive player at his age. He should be a good help to that secondary that needs it. Trayvon Diggs, I think he can benefit by being mentored by Gilmore, because Diggs, he racked up a lot of interceptions, but the problem is he got frequently torched at times. So yeah, I think Diggs can benefit greatly from Stephon Gilmore. And looking at some of their key potential games in 2023, obviously you have the games against your own division, like Week 1 against the New York Giants, and probably the two big games against Philadelphia. I think those are the most important games in your schedule if you're Dallas. And then Week 5, the rematch against the 49ers. That's another big game that they should be looking at as well. So going into 2023, for all the things I talked about with Dallas, I think the biggest question has to be, with all the kind of like, I don't want to say like losses that they occurred, because they did at least add on to it. It's more so of a question of, can they trust Dak Prescott under center? I mean, yeah, you could say yes, but there have been times in the last two seasons where Dak Prescott has been so 50-50. It's, all that 50-50 booking, brother, that wrestling fans like to bring up so much. With Dak Prescott, like in these last two seasons, he has been so wildly inconsistent. Like 1 week he'll have a really good game, and then the next week he'll throw like interceptions left and right that he costs the team's games. And in these last two playoff losses that the Cowboys have had, Dak Prescott doesn't step up. Like, sure, he's played two really good defenses against the 49ers, but it's just like he just disappears. He just disappears against those really good defenses, like in those big moments that the Cowboys really need him. So if he continues to commit 50-50 booking, brother, I feel like it's going to be another wasted season for the Cowboys. So even though the Cowboys finished 12-5, and they lost against the 49ers in the divisional, I still think they have a chance to make the playoffs again for the third straight season. They still have a lot of talent on this team. They did add a good amount of talent in Brandon Cooks and Stephon Gilmore to help out both sides of the ball. You still have a strong offensive line. It's just a matter of, can Dak Prescott be consistent? Can he limit the turnovers that have plagued the team in the second half of the season? So that's going to be key to Dallas, like trying to compete with the Philadelphia Eagles and possibly even the New York Giants. And hell, maybe even the Washington Commanders. Probably the whole division. So I expect Dallas to go 10-7. I do think they could possibly make the playoffs again. But again, it's just going to be a matter of, well, can the Cowboys, and how much longer can they trust Dak Prescott under center? And sure, he has that big fat contract, but at some point, you really got to wonder how much of this is going to last. So the final team that we're going to be talking about here in part 4 of our NFL season preview month and the last team in the NFC East, and the last team in the NFC, well, is the NFC champion. The Philadelphia Eagles, the city of brotherly love. And for the Eagles, it certainly was that way in 2022 because entering this past season, they had a boatload of new additions, but the big question mark was whether or not Jalen Hurts, their third-year quarterback, could improve after a middle-of-the-pack 2021. Sure, they made the playoffs, but they were winless against actual playoff teams. And they got their butt whooped by Tom Brady and the Bucs in that wild card game. So the Eagles actually took initiative to improve themselves in the offseason and make those new additions that I just mentioned. And as a result, Jalen Hurts took a massive leap in 2022. He played like an MVP that, honestly, if you could make a case that maybe he should have won it over Patrick Mahomes. So anyway, I digress. He had an MVP-like year. He led a well-balanced team to the NFC's top seed, despite the team losing him for like 1 or 2 games. And they easily dispatched of their playoff competition, although an asterisk on that second game in the NFC title game. Asterisk, guaranteed. But nonetheless, they made their first Super Bowl appearance since 2017. We all know that special game against the New England Patriots with Nick Foles. But yeah, they're going to Super Bowl 57 against another dynamic team in the Kansas City Chiefs. And Jalen Hurts in that game was actually pretty damn good. The Kansas City Chiefs defense couldn't contain Hurts for much of that game. But neither could the Philadelphia defense against Patrick Mahomes in the second half. And yeah, in that back and forth affair, Philadelphia just came up short in Super Bowl 57 against Mahomes and the Chiefs. So for the Philadelphia Eagles, obviously the big goal is to get back there, to go back to the Super Bowl. This time it's in Vegas, and this time win it all. So obviously that was easier said than done because considering how much you spent in the offseason, you didn't have too much money to spend. And there are going to be a couple of players that are either going to try to resign or they're going to go somewhere else. But in terms of what I thought the team needed during that offseason, they needed to find like a defensive tackle. They needed to find an interior defensive lineman because, again, like I said, they were going to lose at least one of them. They're going to lose at least one of them. They also needed to find a new starting safety because, like I said, they're bound to lose one of their biggest ones. And looking at some of their key offseason moves for the Philadelphia Eagles, they re-signed quarterback Jalen Hurts to a large, big, fat extension. Yeah. Probably not even bigger than Patrick Mahomes, but I don't know. I digress. What were the numbers? But either way, they re-signed Jalen Hurts to a big, fat contract. They also re-signed the likes of corner James Bradbury, defensive tackle Fletcher Cox, edge rusher Brandon Graham. So 2 big pieces in that defensive line already locked in. They also got back Jason Kelce after he initially teased retirement, and then running back Boston Scott. And they certainly will need Boston Scott because, well, the next guy I'm going to get into, they certainly lost him. Miles Sanders. They lost Miles Sanders to the Carolina Panthers, getting a decent deal. So a big part of that offense is gone with that 3-headed running attack from the Eagles. And then perhaps another big move that the Eagles lost on was both their coordinators from the team. So they took head coaching jobs. Offensive coordinator Shane Steichen went to become the Indianapolis Colts' new head coach. And then Jonathan Gannon, their defensive coordinator, took on the new role of being the Cardinals' head coach. So I totally forgot who was their new coordinators, but either way, their new coordinators are going to have a tall task of trying to replace these 2 coordinators that have done pretty well for themselves, that have not only set up head coaching gigs for themselves, but yeah, that has made this Eagles team so well balanced, so dynamic on their way to the Super Bowl. And perhaps the most surprising move in the Eagles like free agency departures was safety CJ Gardner-Johnson. And he pretty much took like a 1-year prove-it deal. Like, that was a little bit surprising to me. Perhaps like the money wasn't there in Philadelphia. So he decided to go to Detroit. I don't know. Maybe it was a schematic fix. I don't know. But it was a little surprising that CJ Gardner-Johnson didn't stay on with the Eagles because he was like a big part of their secondary. And now he decided to go to Detroit to help them out. I mean, I say it's a bad move, but it's just kind of weird. And then they also lost a huge part of that defensive line in Javon Hargrave to the 49ers. Yeah, the team that they beat in the NFC title game. They also lost offensive lineman Andre Dillard to the Tennessee Titans. A couple more other pieces on their defense. TJ Edwards to the Bears at linebacker. Also at linebacker, Kaiser White to the Arizona Cardinals. And then their other safety, Marcus Epps to the Raiders. But I say losing CJ Gardner-Johnson is going to be big for them. Who they did add, however, was I don't think it's going to offset however much they lost on defense. And I'd say offense in general. They added the likes of Rashad Penny from the Seahawks, so at running back, corner Greedy Williams from the Cleveland Browns, and then safety Justin Evans from the New Orleans Saints. They also added backup quarterback Marcus Mariota from the Atlanta Falcons because Gardner Minshew, their backup, went to the Colts along with Shane Steichen. But I will admit they did well for themselves in the draft because they added a defensive tackle, Jalen Carter from Georgia, to replace Javon Hargrave. And Jalen Carter looks pretty good for himself. And then they got themselves linebacker Nolan Smith from Georgia. And considering that the Cowboys didn't pick him, the Eagles were gifted Nolan Smith. And he looks pretty damn good. So, yeah, the Cowboys are seriously going to regret that one. They also got offensive lineman by the name of Tyler Steen from Alabama. So definitely helps when the Eagles' offensive line was pretty good in 2022. They also got a safety by the name of Sidney Brown from Illinois. So potential replacement for Gardner-Johnson or Marcus Epps. And then corner Kelly Ringo from Georgia. So when you look at this Philadelphia Eagles team going into 2023, they obviously lost a lot of big players. And, they did their best to try to replace them in the draft because that's where they mainly tried to replace them to. But, I honestly don't expect them to try to replicate the defensive success that they had in 2022 because, it's just not, I wouldn't say it's attainable. I don't think it's as attainable. Maybe on the defensive line, maybe they can mask the weakness that was present in the secondary. But I imagine, it might not be as attainable of the success, especially in the passing defense, because that passing defense was just torched in the Super Bowl when you think about it. I will say the defensive line, though, is going to be their biggest strength because, like I said, you already have Fletcher Cox, you already have Brandon Graham, you have Josh Sweat, you have Hassan Reddick, and even though you lost Javon Hargrave and Robert Quinn, you got Jalen Carter and Nolan Smith in the rotation there too. So that's a strong D-line rotation there. So you can't be too mad at that. But still, I will say, if they can't get to the quarterback, though, that secondary is going to look pretty suspect with just Darius Slay and James Bradbury there. Because what about the middle with the safety position? You have questions there. You really have questions there with CJ Gardner-Johnson gone. And then the running game, I have questions about that too. No, there's no more Miles Sanders. You're replacing him with Rashad Penny unless Boston Scott's going to be the lead back. And, last season, even though the Eagles relied heavily on Jalen Hurts' scrambling ability, so you basically have like a four-headed dragon, opposing teams are going to do their damnedest to shut Jalen Hurts' running ability down for as much as they can. So Boston Scott, Kenneth Gainwell, Rashad Penny are going to really have to step it up now that Miles Sanders is in Carolina. So looking at some of their potential key games of 2023, you start on the road against New England and the Patriots. And sure, Foxborough, Gillette Stadium's not as intimidating as it once was after Tom Brady retired. Tom Brady left to go to Tampa, but hey, you can never underestimate Bill Belichick in the Patriots for as bad as they were in 2022. And then you go back home on a very short week to play the Minnesota Vikings in primetime yet again, but this time on Prime Video, pal. Yeah. Oh my God. Fuck Prime Video, by the way. And then you have a very grueling late season stretch, weeks 11 to 14. You got a gauntlet right here. You go to Kansas City to play the Chiefs in a Super Bowl rematch on Monday night. Oof. And then a couple days later, you get a home slate with the Buffalo Bills, Josh Allen, and then whoever's at quarterback, you still got to play a strong 49ers team. And then you go on the road. They start a 2-game road slate, but then that big road slate includes the Dallas Cowboys in prime time. Oof. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the Eagles handle that road slate, see where they're at. And that leads into my big questions going for Philadelphia as they try to defend their NFC crown and try to make it back to the Super Bowl. Can they avoid the dreaded Super Bowl curse that faces each and every Super Bowl loser? So the last two teams that have lost the Super Bowl, which was the Kansas City Chiefs in Super Bowl 55 and the Cincinnati Bengals in Super Bowl 56, they had their early struggles, especially considering Mahomes. He looked pretty iffy. And then he turned it around. And, Joe Burrow did too. And then he went on that 8 to 9 game winning streak going to the AFC Championship game. So both of these teams made it to as far as the conference finals in the NFL. I think the Eagles will have their struggles for sure, but they got to make sure their team doesn't regress severely or suffer any major injuries, especially to their quarterback, Jalen Hurts. They cannot afford a big injury. Otherwise, their season's going to go. Because this team is talented. Like, I'm willing to admit it. This team is definitely talented, but they got to avoid any bad luck, especially considering they can take full advantage of this very weak NFC. So, also, where's the rushing production going to come from? Boston Scott, Kenneth Gainwell, Rashad Penny, somebody else. Because certainly can't be Jalen Hurts all day long. Don't make it a Josh Allen situation in Philadelphia. So the Eagles lost a good amount of their players throughout the offseason, along with both of their coordinators. But I do think they're talented enough to trample a very weak NFC. I think they're still going to be like formidable opponents on their schedule. Of course, they'll have their own self-challenges. But I still think it's going to be possible for the Eagles to potentially pull off their redemption arc. It's entirely possible that they do that. It's also entirely possible that 2 months before WrestleMania 40 comes to their place in Philadelphia, that they finish the story before maybe, who knows, Cody Rhodes or Jey Uso or Liv Morgan or somebody else down in Lincoln Financial Field finishes their story. The Eagles finish their story in Vegas and wins the Super Bowl. Who knows? Either way, as long as the Eagles don't run into any bad luck, they don't suffer any major injuries, they play just as well as they did in 2022 going into Arizona. I think they'll be just fine. They can dominate like they did in 2022, and potentially win the NFC East yet again, and maybe even the NFC, and make a run at the Super Bowl. There could be a little bit of regression, but not too much. Maybe 12-5 to keep it safe. But like I said, the Philadelphia Eagles have a very good chance to get back to that big stage, and maybe finish their story 2 months before another story is written at WrestleMania 40. And with that is a wrap on the NFC East season preview 2023 and a wrap on our NFL season preview coverage 2023 part 4 and a wrap on the NFC side of our season preview. So we're all done with the NFC. So what do you guys think? Like on the NFC side of things? Sure, definitely a lot of weaker teams on this side, but I think things will start to pick up when we start talking about the AFC. So for now, what do you guys think about the NFC teams? For this episode, what about the NFC East teams? We talked about the Washington Commanders, the New York Giants, the Dallas Cowboys, and the Philadelphia Eagles. It certainly still could be an interesting division, but we'll see how it plays out in 2023. Let's see who finishes their story, as I'd like to say it. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on who wins the NFC East in 2023, who makes a surprise run in the NFC in general, now that we're done with the entirety of the NFC conference. And yeah, next episode, we make our full transition over to the back half of our NFL season preview month by starting off with the AFC. I'm not going to spoil which one division we're talking about yet, but you'll find out when the next episode comes around. But anyway, thank you for tuning in to episode number 152 of this icy yet spicy podcast that is called Very Cold Lasagna. And I am your host, DylanLasagna, signing out. Thank you all for tuning in to my NFL season preview coverage. The first half, at least. We got another half to go, and we're going to continue on with the American Football Conference side of things, the AFC, in the next episode. Until next time, keep that lasagna very cold in the fridge with your takes on the world of sports, and peace out.